Hello, Mike Aben here with the second episode in my Absolute Beginner's Guide to Kerbal Space Program. And in our first episode, what we concentrated on was collecting science, how to collect science and how to use that to unlock new parts. In this episode, we're going to concentrate on getting ourselves off of the ground, how to build something that will fly, and not only fly, but also get back down to the surface safely. And in the process of that discussion, we're going to talk also about how to set up your staging so that things will happen in the order that you want them to happen. We're also going to take a look at another feature in the VAB that will help us in building our rockets. And finally, we're going to take a look at the context menus associated with the parts and how they can help us tweak our rockets to make them even better. But before we do that, we're going to get started by returning to the research and development building. And we talked about this in the last episode, going through the tech tree, using our science points to unlock parts. But there's another tab up here that I want to show you right now called Archives. And if I click on that, what it is an archive of all the science that we have collected. So over here on the right, we have all the science that we collected last episode. We did crew reports, we did two EVA reports on the crawlerway and on the launch pad. We collected a mystery goo, and then we did two surface samples. I do want to draw attention to these bars here. Notice that for our crew reports and our EVA reports, the bars are completely full. This is telling us that in this particular situation, there is no more science to collect from either crew reports or EVA reports, so don't even try. There's no point. However, notice with the mystery goo and the surface samples, we haven't collected all of them. We did the majority of it, about a good, 80% of it, but there's still some more to get, so it's in your interest to perhaps squeeze out a little bit more. It's just a design of these particular experiments. These do not collect all of it all at once. They collect just some of it. And then you can go back and collect a little bit more. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is if we go over here and take a look at our Situations tab, we've only ever done one situation, which is being on the surface landed. There are many situations that can exist. One is being on the surface landed. The other is being in flight in the lower part of the atmosphere, and being in flight in the higher part of the atmosphere. And I haven't even started about getting into space yet, which we'll talk about next episode. So we're going to be adding more situations than just being on the surface. Also, I didn't draw attention to this, but over here you can start to see all the various places in our solar system we do have to visit. There are 7 different planets if we include Kerbin. And these planets as well have moons around them that we can visit as well. So lots of different places, lots of stuff to get to. But right now, why don't we get to building something? So we're going to go back into the vehicle assembly building, and this time we're going to build something that's going to fly for us. And we're going to start with, the only option we have is once again the same thing as last episode, the Mark 1 capsule in which our brave pilot is going to sit, except this time our pilot is going to be off the ground. And the first thing you want to think about is, how am I going to get this pilot back to the surface safely? I don't want to get this off the ground and then have this whole capsule plummet to the pilot's doom. There are a number of ways in which to get back to the ground safely, but the simplest is simply to put a parachute on this thing. And if we go all the way down to the utility tab down here, we have a number of different parachutes. The one I'm going to use is the Mark 16 parachute. It is designed pretty much specifically for this capsule. It sits right there on top, and it will allow our pilot to come back safely. The other parachutes, which by the way we unlocked with our science from last episode, are radial parachutes. What that means is instead of going on the top, they attach on the sides like this. Okay. Now one thing I want to draw attention to is when I put this parachute on, notice that we got a little parachute icon down here towards the bottom left. This bottom left is our staging diagram. And what we can do while we're in flight is hit the staging button on the PC. That's the space bar. I'm not quite sure what it is on the PlayStation or on the Xbox, but every time we press that button, we will activate that stage. So right now we only have one stage, and what that means is if we activate this stage while in flight, this parachute will deploy. So that will be something we would want to do at some point. Okay, so that will get this thing back safely to the surface. I would like to get this thing now off the ground. In order to do that, we need, well, to put some engines on it. So the third tab down is our engines tab, and currently we have 3 different engines here from which to choose from. The one you start with is this one, but let's talk first about this one that we unlocked. This is called the LV-T45 swivel liquid fuel engine. This is a liquid fuel engine. It runs on liquid fuel, and you would need to bring that fuel along with you, obviously, but what you also need to bring along with you is what is called oxidizer. In order to burn fuel, you require oxygen, so you need some sort of compound that has oxygen in it, or just literally liquid oxygen itself. We don't typically think about that in our lives here on the surface of the planet, because all around us there's plenty of oxygen in the air that we breathe. But if you're going to go up into space, you need to bring that oxygen with you, and that would be in the form of oxidizer. So if I'm going to use this liquid fuel engine, I need to put on a fuel tank. The fuel tanks are right above. We've only got one so far, and this fuel tank, if we look, contains both liquid fuel and oxidizer, and these fuel tanks always have them in the appropriate ratio so that as you're burning through them, it'll burn through both at the same rate, and they'll go empty at the same. So you want to end up with extra liquid fuel at the end or extra oxidizer at the end, which is kind of nice. Let's take a look at the other kind of engines that we have. Right here we have the RT-10 Hammer solid fuel booster, and right beside it we have the RT-5 Flea solid fuel booster. This one being the smaller version of this one. They're almost the same. These run on a different type of fuel. If we take a look over here, these have what's called solid fuel in it and no oxidizer. This is because solid fuel is a combination of both the fuel and the oxidizer mixed together, and it will burn both at the same time. Also, what's different about this is that the fuel is contained right in with the engine. So this is actually a combination fuel tank and engine. Since this is the simpler of our two options, I'm actually going to use this one. I'm going to grab this heavier hammer and put it on here. Now, one important difference between the solid fuel boosters and the liquid fuel engines is that solid fuel engines, you cannot throttle them. What that means is you can't increase the throttle or decrease the throttle while you are in flight. Once they're going, they go at their full throttle until they run out of fuel, and that's the only time in which they stop. You have no way in which to turn them off. The liquid fuel engines, you can throttle. You can put on the gas, you can take off the gas, you can turn them off at any point that you want to. So that is really the main difference between the two. These are the simpler ones, but they give you less control of the vehicle. I'm kind of cool with that, so I'm actually going to stay with the solid fuel booster. We'll look at liquid fuel engines in the next episode. So far so good. Now, one of the issues is this solid fuel booster is attached to our capsule. I'm going to run it until it runs out of fuel, but then what's going to end up happening is, well, it'll still be attached, and that's going to be a lot of dead weight as this thing comes down, especially on this tiny little parachute. It would be great if we could get rid of this thing. We don't care about recovering it. We only want to recover our pilot in the capsule. So we need to find some way to detach that. If we go down here to this tab, we can see that it says coupling. This gives us ways of attaching and detaching various parts of our vessel together, and in here we have just one part that we unlocked last episode, the TD-12 decoupler. If I pull this off and instead stick in this decoupler, this gives us a means for which to separate these two. Now, notice that when I added my engine, when I added the decoupler icons for them, there's my decoupler icon and the engine icon have been added on to my staging diagram. However, there's a bit of a problem, and this is a really common problem in KSP. You'll want to check this every time. The way the staging works is it works from the bottom on up. So if I put this thing on the launch pad and stage, the very first thing it's going to do is separate the capsule from the rocket. And notice that this rocket is actually next on the staging. Well, that's completely the wrong way I want to do it. I want to have the rocket go up. That's the first thing I want to do, have the rocket go off. And then have the decoupler in the next stage. That makes a lot more sense. So the rocket goes, it's going to go until it runs out of fuel, and then we're going to separate our capsule. Now notice that these two icons are actually in the same stage. So what that means is when I stage, it will actually not only decouple the capsule, but it'll also stage the parachute. It'll deploy that parachute at the same time. Perhaps they're fine with that. It actually will probably work completely fine, but I kind of want these all on separate stages, so I'm going to hit the plus button here. That adds in an extra stage. The decoupler now can go into that stage, and now these things happen as 3 separate stages. First, we fire our engine. Second, we decouple. Last thing we're going to do is fire off our parachute. Okay, this is starting to look now like something that's actually going to work. Let's add in a few more things. Let's make this thing more aerodynamically stable. If we go down here to aerodynamics, we have one aerodynamic part called a basic tail fin. So we're going to click that onto there. Okay. Fins help to make the rocket more stable. Think about if you throw darts, what a dart is like, or if you bows and arrows, what an arrow is like. It has its mass towards the front, and then it has fins towards the back, and that helps it sail through the air in, well, a nice arc, not necessarily a straight line. We want the same thing to happen for our rocket. Now, I would like to get, let's say, 3 of these equally spaced around this rocket. Now, one thing I could do is I guess I could grab another one and try and sort of, eyeball it, but we have a simpler option here. Down here towards the bottom left, we have 2 little buttons that I want to draw attention to right now. This one's called the toggle snap. The toggle snap means that instead of snapping into position, it can go anywhere. See how that's not, but if I put on the snap, this now snaps into different positions. So that's one useful one. This one here, though, is even more useful. It's the symmetry one. Right now I have it on single symmetry. If I select that, I can change that to 2x symmetry. So what that means now is if I put the part on, automatically there's another one exactly opposite to it parting on the other side. I can go to 3x symmetry, 4x symmetry, 6x symmetry, 8x symmetry, and then it cycles back down to 1. So I want this on 3x symmetry. Put this right here. There we go. Now this is looking a lot more aerodynamically stable for me. Nice. Okay. Next, well, science! This is all about science. I've been forgetting about the science. So, let's take a look at the science tab right down here. And we now have 3 pieces of science equipment that we can attach to this thing. One is the mystery goo, which we had last episode, and then these 2 newly unlocked ones, the too hot thermometer and the press mat barometer. And we'll make sure to add these on too, but let's start with the goo. Now remember, the booster is not going to be coming back, so we have to make sure to attach this to the capsule so that when the capsule returns, we'll still have the science inside this mystery goo. Also, remember when we looked at the archive, we saw that we had some mystery goo that we had already collected from the launch pad. Well, once we are in flight, we're going to be able to collect a fresh mystery goo in flight. Once we're in the upper part of the atmosphere, and this thing is capable of getting to the upper part of the atmosphere, we will get a 3rd mystery goo that we could collect. Finally, the aim of all of this is to put this down into the water. That is actually a new 4th situation. I would like to collect a mystery goo there as well. So what I'm just going to do to rectify that situation is simply put 4 of these on here. So I'm going to put on 2-way symmetry. We're going to put 2 of them down here, so one on this side, one on the opposite side, and then we're going to grab another one and put it above it like that. So now we have the ability to do 4 of these without our pilot ever having to come out of their capsule. So that's good so far. Okay, let's take a look at the next one, thermometer. Same situation with the thermometer. We'll be able to collect a thermometer on the launch pad, again while we're flying in the lower part of the atmosphere, again when we're in the upper part of the atmosphere, and then once again when we are splashed down over the water. And then we're going to do the same thing with the barometer. This thing now is pretty much all scienced up. There's a couple of more things I want to do. before we get started. Number one, if we click onto the capsule, on the capsule here we have a variety of bars that we can adjust. The one I want to pay attention to right now is this monopropellant. Monopropellant is a third type of fuel that we can use. Well, not really, well, we won't get into it. But a third type of mechanism through which we can propel our vehicle. We have liquid fuel and oxidizer, we have solid fuel, and we have monopropellant. I'm not that interested in having any monopropellant because there's nothing on this vessel that would use it, so I'm going to take that out. So we'll have 0 monopropellant. That will help us save some weight, and saving weight is a good thing. So I'm going to give this thing a name this time. We're going to call this our first ship, our first rocket. Let's call it our first rocket. I'm going to check our crew. We have Jebediah already in there. Sure, Jebediah is a pilot. I want a pilot. Jeb's already snagged the seat, so he called it. So he's in there. Oh, we are almost there. But if I were to launch this thing right now, it would actually go like a bat out of hell. It has too much thrust, and that potentially can damage equipment. It could potentially cause the rocket to explode and potentially kill our pilot. So I would like to bring this under control. If I go down here to our engine, notice that there's a number here. I don't want to talk about it right now. What I want to talk about is I want to click on this to expand it. We get even more information. And the one I want to draw attention to here is TWR. That stands for thrust to weight ratio. I have a video where I go over this in detail if you want to understand exactly how thrust to weight ratios work. But it is a ratio between the amount of thrust compared to the amount of weight. The higher the thrust to weight ratio, the quicker your rocket is going to accelerate. Now, if you want the rocket to be able to get off the ground, it has to have a thrust to weight ratio of at least 1. But you really don't want it too much higher than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this, and one of the things I can adjust here is the thrust limiter. And if I change that to a different value and then look over here to my thrust to weight ratio, you can see now it's changed to 1.84. That's more in the direction I would like. I would like it to be in around 1.3. That's actually a fairly realistic thrust to weight ratio for real world rockets. Now my thrust to weight ratio is 0.87. That means this thing won't even be able to get off the ground. Remember, it has to be at least 1, so we'll include it a little bit like this. Now, if you're getting a little bit frustrated with always dragging this, there's a little button here with a little hashtag number symbol on it. And if you click on that, you can actually change these numbers by hand. So for instance, I have it now at 1.42 for my thrust to weight ratio. What happens if I put in a 31? Clearly, this is a PC only type of thing. I apologize. That put my thrust to weight ratio to 1.31. Let's put it to 31.5. What is that? Oh, that's 1.33. I like that very, very much. So we're going to keep it there. Now that's a nice, sane little thrust to weight ratio. We're going to save this. One last thing we're going to do with this rocket. Let's make it, pimp it out just a little bit. If we right click on many of the parts, you'll see down here that you can actually change the appearance. So you can make this capsule all white. You can make it kind of white and gray. I like this white and gray one. You could do the same thing here with this booster. You can put on a little orange stripe down here on the bottom or a little bit of a yellow stripe. That's all the modifications you can do. I like this a little bit better. There we go. We'll go with this. Doesn't change anything in terms of functionality. Let's save. Let's launch. There are a number of things I want to do. Like, notice all of this stuff, and I got to sort of click on this stuff to not. So instead of worrying about clicking on them while in flight, I'm going to grab each of these menus and I'm going to pin them over here towards the side. So I'm going to be ready to do what I need to do and know exactly where everything is. So now we have these windows all set to go. Okay, let's do some stuff on the launch pad. Now, one thing I want to draw attention to, remember we talked about this very at the beginning, no more crew reports I can do on the launch pad. No science to be collected there. So that was of no use whatsoever. But I can do a mystery goo. We'll click on that. Little bit of science, 0.7 science. Remember, there wasn't much left to get on the launch pad, but we'll keep that. That's useful. And then we'll take that window away because we don't need that anymore. We can also do a temperature scan. 2.4 units of temperature scan. Notice that the bar is completely full. That means we're going to get all the science there is to collect on the launch pad. We'll get rid of that window. And we'll log a pressure scan, 3.6 science from the pressure scan. Notice again, bar being full. So when we grab this, we know we got all the barometer science from the launch pad. Jebediah can do an EVA and hang on here. We're going to right click on him. If he does an EVA report, notice there's no more science to collect because we already did that last episode, but there is a little bit of a surface sample he can collect, so we'll grab that and we'll get ourselves inside. So we're going to board, and there we go. That's the last time Jebediah is going to get out of this capsule until he's safely on the surface. And we are off, putting ourselves in a new situation. No longer on the surface, so we can collect science. Let's get a mystery goo. Collecting that now, flying at Kerbin. And as I continue to collect science, taking advantage of the menus I have pinned over here to the side, one thing you're probably noticing that I'm not talking about is flight controls. That is a big topic all onto itself. And I think it's something I'm going to put onto next episode, where our goal is going to be to get ourselves into space. As far as this flight goes, though, there are a few situations we did get ourselves into. Once we were above 18 kilometers, we entered Kerbin's upper atmosphere. That is a new situation and a whole new batch of science. And of course, our final situation is going to be down on the surface of the water. And we'll be able to collect more science again then. But while I'm working my way to that point, why don't we recap the main points from this episode? Number one, we went to the R&D Center and looked at the archive section, which records all of the science that you collected. You want to get in here every once in a while to sort of plan your next science collection and what it's going to be. Number two, we got into the VAB and we started building, and the first thing you should be thinking about is how are you going to return your Kerbinauts safely. The simplest means of that is by using a parachute. Number three, we talked about symmetry. When building, it is important to think about symmetry, and the VAB gives you tools to help you accomplish that. Number four, check your staging. Even the most experienced KSP players get caught on this one from time to time, so make sure your staging diagram is the way you want it to be. And finally, number five, we talked about the context menus that are associated with the parts and how to tweak the values in those menus to help your rocket be everything that it can be. And with that, we'll watch Jebediah safely splash down to the surface of Kerbin once again and begin collecting that so valuable science. Remember, next episode we'll be talking about how to fly these things and also how to get ourselves finally into space. It is Kerbal Space Program after all. But in the meantime, I'm going to thank you for watching and hope to see you again next time.